Who, I asked, is Count von Meissner? Bishop Alvarez looked up from the documents and maps on his table and stared at me. My dear Heinrich, he is a potential enemy of the Holy Roman Emperor and of the Church. Some think he may invade in support of the Calvinists. This war has been going on for years now, so that some of my superiors are even talking about negotiations and peace, but that would mean accommodating our enemies. If he is assassinated, it will stop the invasion and deter others, and perhaps give some backbone to my weaker colleagues. That seemed reasonable. Assassination is an old tool for political and military gain, and I had contributed to it myself. In fact, it gave me a good living. I did not really choose to take it up as a career, but in the army I had become tired of the cautious tactics of my superior and took a small force to ambush and kill an enemy general. The word got around that I was good at it, and my commander began using me for some covert attacks in enemy cities. Yet, as my skills improved, and the more work I did, I used less help from any others. In fact, I trusted others less and less, preferring to work by myself. Eventually, the church authorities must have heard, and soon the bishop was using me for various operations as well. I was well rewarded. Occasionally, he tried to persuade me to offer my services a bit more cheaply as a donation to the church, but I let it be known that the church's own well-being and preservation from its perceived enemies would be more speedy and effective if I was speedily and generously rewarded. Where does he live anyway? Is it far to travel? That will affect my expenses and my price. He is ruler of a small city and surroundings in a part of Hungary a little bit east of US. You are much too concerned with material gain, however. I did not show my skepticism. These words were from someone who lived in his own large mansion in a secluded area just outside the city, wore rich robes, and continually ate well. We had just finished a sumptuous meal, whose cost would have supported a peasant family for a month. I hope it is not far or much distance from here. It would involve me in dangerous travel, and I am not sure I want to take the task. Didn't the former ruler there impale his enemies? I certainly had no wish to end my days on a wooden stake. You need instruction in geography. You are thinking of Transylvania, said Alvarez. That is in another part of Hungary, well to the east, half under the influence of the Ottoman. Anyway, these deeds were in past days, he snapped. Such brutality is not found any longer. He had quite forgotten the excesses of the Spanish Inquisition, I supposed, and what the German peasants were enduring with the plunder and exactions of one side, then the other, and invaders from almost all of Europe as they fought out their wars on German territory. I had seen whole villages destroyed and the corpses of their inhabitants, dead from starvation, lying unburied in the mud. Still, I had no right to sermonize. I had been responsible for quite few deaths myself. When I named a price, the bishop scowled at me and offered just half of that. We eventually settled at about 2/3 of the original figure. I was fairly satisfied, and I did not want to drive too hard a bargain, or he might at some point have set his old friends on me. After all, Alvarez was a Spaniard, and it was rumored he had been associated with the Inquisition before coming to this part of the empire. Now that the main business was over, the money, we relaxed a bit more over some wine from Alvarez's cellar. I liked these Spanish wines and soon felt relaxed and easy. Do you have any ideas on how you are going to carry out the task? Alvarez asked. I thought about my past assignments. It will depend on how much access I can get to von Meissner and how easy it will be for me to escape. I have no doubt he will be well protected. As for methods, in the past I have used poison, knives, gunpowder, and muskets. I like the musket. It gives me a better chance of escape, but it is not as accurate as I would prefer. No, it will depend on how well guarded he is. I have to make sure of my own escape too. Alvarez leaned to me. Something that is a shameful death, or in circumstances that shame him, would be good. We do not want to make a martyr out of him for his supporters. Not that any true Christian, he added hastily, would think it anyway. We of the faith know that these people have little reverence for the saints and other holy martyrs. They are even worse than the followers of that Luther. Soon we were discussing the various methods of dealing death. Assassination was professional work for me, but I was surprised at the interest and expertise Alvarez showed in methods of killing. Finally, the talk came to when it should be done. Actually, I will get to it as soon as I can. It is spring and that will make travel easier. Do you want to speak to anybody to learn about him? To discover any weaknesses? No, I trust nobody. There might be spies around and the word could get back that I am making plans and he was in danger of assassination. What about language? I do not know any Hungarian. That should be no trouble. It is a German-speaking area. There are quite a few German-speaking people there already. I carefully did not mention that many of these were German refugees from the continual wars and conflicts in the Holy Roman Empire. Yes, I could pose as one of these. I can say I was a merchant, but got apprehensive of my life and decided to go to a safer location. Or that I am looking for a wife, I added, just to test him. He scowled at me again. I think he occasionally thought on me as a kind of holy warrior monk, like the Templars or Teutonic Knights in the past, and that I should be celibate. He would have no such luck. I liked using women, although I had not married yet, and I was certainly not interested in poverty. Actually, I had begun to think that after a few more assassinations, with the money I would earn, I could be quite wealthy. Then, with wealth assured, I could marry some well-connected girl, perhaps even the daughter of some old but poor nobility, establish myself as a gentleman in some peaceful corner of the empire and set about starting my own little dynasty. Who knows, with judicious choosing of sides my descendants might become counts or even higher. I had planned to set off on my journey in 2 days, just as soon as I was able to purchase some materials for travel and the business at hand, but the day before my departure I got a summons from Bishop Alvarez. "How are your plans getting on?" he asked. "What cover will you use?" "I have been thinking about that. I could pretend that I am a physician, or perhaps an alchemist, and that I am working on the transmutation of lead into gold. Heads of states are always in need of money and that would get his interest and could lead to easy access, if I let it be known I have made valuable discoveries. Of course, as far as I know, no one has ever been successful at transmutation, but you remember the last assignment you set me? One of the persons I met on the journey was an alchemist. I did him a good turn, in fact I saved his life. In return he gave me a vial of material. If that liquid is wiped on tin, it gives it the appearance of gold, unfortunately only on the surface, but it will do as a start to whet his interest. I had not saved the alchemist's life through any altruism. It was just that I had rapidly dispatched several robbers who were attacking my group, which included him. Alvarez was nodding slowly. If you are dabbling in a physician's or alchemist's work, I have something you might be able to use. Just a minute. He rummaged in his desk and brought out a small locked wooden box. He selected a key, opened the lock and drew out a small book. We got this from some gypsies. After we had reports of some engaged in necromancy, we seized them and imprisoned them. Under questioning, they were persuaded to give us some of their secrets, one of which was an old book. It was supposed to have magic spells, but that was a lie. However, the words in the book look plausible. You can have it if you want to add credence to your disguise. I looked at him skeptically. You believe in magic? His statement was quite an admission for one who had worked with the Inquisition. The devil has many ways in which to tempt us all. We have tried some of these so-called spells. He gave a short laugh, more of a snort. But they had absolutely no effect. When I confronted the gypsies with the fact that the spells were ineffective, they admitted it. They said the spells were just used, along with trickery, for gullible peasants. Alvarez stroked his beard. Yet, I wonder why they did not admit it in the first place. It would have saved them much tort. Interrogation. Still, who understands gypsies? I got the impression that Alvarez was actually sorry that the spells had not worked. So you wish me to have this, even though the use of spells, effective or not, is surely not Christian? He looked at me, enough venom in his gaze to make me shiver. I should have been more tactful. Perhaps I should not had so much wine. It is not for you, a layman, to question the deeds of the church. Anyway, my labors are all used for the good of the church. Have a look at this. He handed over a small book bound in cloth. This hardly looks old, I said. The cover is not worn at all, and, I looked inside, the pages are quite fresh. Well, no. Actually, it is a copy. We made a copy to study it better. The original was in very bad condition. Unfortunately, the fool who copied the original left it in a damp, unprotected place and it became all moldy. What was left was smelly and illegible, and the pages were rotting apart, so we got rid of it. I flicked through the page, trying to read the material. I looked up at him. I read some German words, but these? I pointed to some other words. What language is that? I cannot understand these at all. Yes, they appear to be in some old language. It was in the gypsy's original book. These are supposed to be the actual spell. The others, which appear to be explanations, were in their own gypsy language. We have translated these words, so that's why the instructions are in German. The other language, we do not know, but the gypsies told us under questioning that the sounds approximate those of some ancient Eastern language. I have studied ancient languages myself, and some of the sounds are reminiscent of ancient Greek, but I can still make no sense of them. It all seems rather elaborate for something that is really just a hoax. I read over the instructions for the so-called spells. They seemed mostly for medical purposes, such as curing toothache, mending birth defects and so on, all stuff supposedly to cure ailments. I read on a few pages. It was all boring stuff. More medical remedies, none of them much interest to me, being an assassin. My trade was in the ending of life, not in saving. I closed the book with a snap. I had better things to do than continue reading nonsense. Yes, perhaps I could also pretend to be a physician. So, would you like to use the book? But the spells do not work. You just said so. Unfortunately not, we have tried them, but with no success. We know gypsies are supposed to have used them, but we have no verifiable information. But why not take it with you? Reading some of the exotic words when you see clients may add to the effect you are trying to convey. Even if you went as an alchemist, you would need some things to help with your disguise and lend credence to it. All right. I will use the book. You do not wish to keep it? He shrugged. No, as far as I am concerned, the spells do not work, and we are finished with them. Just more gypsy nonsense. So, if there has been no sorcery, what about the gypsies? Will you release them? These people are a hindrance to order, and a bad example to ordinary citizens and peasants. If they are kept in prison, it would be better for everyone. In fact, most of them have already died in our custody. One young woman who is left has been quite cooperative. He thought for a moment. I tell you, why not take her with you? A woman like her would add credence to your disguise. I suppose you may wish to make other use of her too. I knew what he meant, but I just was not interested in using a woman at this time. Then again, a gypsy woman might add to the impression I was trying to give, and she could do mending and cooking for me. Will she not want to escape? It hardly matters if she does. What is one girl, and a gypsy? But we still have her younger brother. I believe that they are quite attached to each other. He will remain here under our care as a surety for her return and good behavior. If she does decide to flee, it will be too bad for him. Can I see the girl, to see if she is suitable? You know I prefer working alone. Yes, I will have them bring her from prison tomorrow. The next morning I waited with Alvarez in his office near the cathedral while some guards brought the girl from her cell. They threw her at our feet and I studied her. She was quite young, about 16, I suppose. She was ragged and dirty, with 1 or 2 fading bruises on her face. Her complexion was dark, her skin with a touch of an olive cast to it. She was thin, but had been pretty once, I suppose. She might even be pretty again if she were better fed and had a good wash. Her long hair was stringy and greasy. Her brown eyes seemed dead. "What is your name, girl?" I asked. She looked up at me. "Melia, master." Her voice was dead too, but her accent was exotic. "This is Herr Muller," said Alvarez. "I was telling him about the book. He may want to use it." I asked her about the book, but she just looked at me resignedly and in a flat emotionless voice gave the story that it was only used to fool the gullible. She certainly looked gypsy. She did not appear to have much spirit, so she would probably obey me absolutely. I studied her carefully. Yes, I think she will do. But why not have her washed? She would not help my disguise looking like she is. Yes, I suppose so. "Do you need any other material to aid in your disguise as an alchemist?" asked Alvarez. I turned away from the girl. "I have a few things, and maybe I can do some sleight of hand too, or other tricks." "Please, sir," broke in the girl. "If you want, I am a gypsy. I know some conjuring and other tricks. Perhaps I could help you." "Could you indeed?" said Alvarez. "More gypsy lies," he spat. I watched the girl cringe. "No, she may be useful. It would add to my cover, and if she knows tricks, so much the better. Please, if I help you, will you release me and my brother Strick?" That was twice that the girl had broken into our conversation. I wondered if she had more spirit than she had shown initially. I looked at Alvarez. "Well, she is no use to you now, and I suppose she could help me." Alvarez screwed up his face and thought. "Yes, I agree," he said. He looked at the girl. "Herr Muller has to go on an expedition to the east of us. He needs a woman to cook for him and do other domestic tasks. Do you wish to go with him? However, your brother must stay here as security for your return and your good behavior. Then, if we give you your freedom, you must accept banishment from here." There was little doubt of that, I thought. The girl was fairly cowed. She and her relatives had no doubt been tortured and most killed. She would be a fool to wish to stay here. She lifted her eyes to look at me, but otherwise did not reply, although a brief flash of hope passed over her lethargic features. "How long will this take?" she said. Her voice was hoarse. "About a month, I think. Possibly longer," I said. "He also may need the help of more gypsies," Alvarez said. "You will help him in every way you can. Otherwise, do you speak German well?" I asked. Her vocabulary so far appeared acceptable. She had an exotic accent, but it gave me little trouble. "Yes," she answered. "Please, Your Excellency, if I serve Herr Muller well, would you also release the rest of my people in your prison?" I looked at the bishop. He nodded slightly. "There are only a few left anyway," he said. "Bishop Alvarez agrees." The girl closed her eyes briefly, as if giving a silent prayer. "Then that is settled," I said. "I will depart tomorrow, at dawn." "What do you need?" I said, looking at her. The girl hesitated and I saw she was afraid to ask in case it was thought insolence. "She will need some clothing to begin with. What she has are only rags," I said. Yes," Alvarez said impatiently, "we have a store of used clothing in a room in the cathedral. She can select some from there." "And food," I said. "Also cooking equipment. We will eat at taverns and inns, but we should have some basics." "Go to the kitchen at my mansion," Alvarez said. "My cook there will give you the supplies you need." Melia was brought to me the next day at Alvarez's mansion. She was now clean, and was wearing fresh clothes. They were shabby, but much better than those she had been wearing. I was using 2 horses. I lifted her up to one. Her body felt thin, but strong. Thank you, Herr Muller. This is the first time I have ridden a horse since was a girl, she said. Make sure you do not fall off, I growled. The horses had been another expense. I would have preferred to go on foot, the less to attract attention, but we might need to get away quickly after the assassination. The travel did not take as long as I thought, and a week after leaving the city we were well into the Hungarian countryside and near our destination. We were also well away from the areas where there had been fighting, and the villages looked prosperous. The fields looked well-tilled and fertile. Count von Meissner lived in the main city, and on arriving there I was met almost immediately by some guards. I was uneasy, but a scrutiny was to be expected. These were dangerous times and strangers were always under suspicion. I told them that I was a refugee from further west, who was seeking refuge from the fighting, and that Melia was my niece. That seemed to arouse no suspicion, and after taking our names they let us proceed. I took a room for the 2 of us at a tavern near the main part of the city. It would be a good place to meet the locals and get to know the lie of the land. I had been thinking about how I could let my skills as an alchemist be known, but my plans took a drastic and rapid modification when I took a small exploration. Just off the town square and on a little rise close to the tavern was a gallows, and already occupied by some unfortunate. I stopped to look at the corpse, wrapped in chains, swinging in the breeze. It looked like the execution had been some time ago, judging by the state of the remains. It had been bound in a net to keep it intact, or I am sure it should have fallen apart. Melia stared at it, her hand in her mouth. What is this obscenity? I asked a passerby. The man is long since dead. It is the Count's doing. He had a special gallows erected just for the likes of those. What do you mean by those? Why, alchemists of course. The Count finally lost patience. He supported this one for years, who kept promising to make gold but failed. Then yet another who also failed. In revenge the Count set up these special gallows, just for alchemists. In fact, now anyone calling himself an alchemist is immediately hanged. I would have to be careful. That over there? There was another gallows, smaller, and a knock-up-id. Oh, that is an ordinary gallows for thieves and others. So the alchemists merited a special gallows, and other malefactors were less honored, if that is the word. I would have to change my plans drastically. We were woken next morning by loud conversation in the tavern below. In fact, the tavern was quite busy. A crowd jostled us as we ate our breakfast. The taverner saw my exasperated face and shook his head in apology. What is all the fuss about? I asked. He laughed. Oh, we have an execution this morning. Just up on the rise there. Soon, with the rest of the tavern customers, Melia and I wound our way to the gallows, standing at the back of the crowd. I kept my hands on my purse, as pickpockets were often active at events like these. In a few minutes several soldiers arrived from the direction of the town center, pulling an unfortunate by a noose round his neck. His hands were roped behind his back. In the procession too was a pastor and a magistrate. The crowd opened round them as they made their way to the scaffold. Who is it? I asked the taverner, who was standing by me. Just a thief, was the reply. As is usual at these affairs, some vendors were selling sweetmeats and various trinkets. Then the crowd quieted as magistrate read his sentence aloud from a parchment. The man sank to his knees and began babbling for mercy as the pastor gave a small prayer, but immediately the prayer ended the rope was thrown over the gallows beam. One soldier cut the man's hands free, but with little more fuss the 3 soldiers dragged him off his feet, cutting off his screams. He began kicking wildly, as the crowd broke into cheers and screams of derision. His free hands pulled at the rope, but to no avail. I thought it would have been merciful to have tied his hands behind his back, then his struggles would have been shorter. However, the practices of this city were no concern of mine. The soldiers fixed the rope to a hook, the shouts and jeering quieted, and all watched as the struggles died away until there was nothing but a slight swinging at the end of the rope, and soon even that virtually died away. A few minutes more and the soldiers, pastor and magistrate left and crowd began to drift back to the town, leaving only one soldier to guard the corpse. Melia was looking at the swaying man through shrewd half-closed eyes. I wondered if she would be upset, but her face seemed more calculating. "What now?" I asked one of the soldiers. "Are you going to leave him there?" "Yes, it is usually the count's wishes that the corpse is left for a week, except for the likes of these." He pointed to the remains of the alchemist. "These are left until the rope rots through." "How long do you stay here with the corpse?" I asked. "Oh, only for an hour or so. Just to make sure no one cuts him down before he is really dead." That evening, as I downed a cup of lager, I looked up to the knoll. The single soldier had now left, leaving the corpse dangling alone from the rope, a crow now sitting on its head. I returned to the inside of the tavern. I had met a group of merchants from the city, and was buying beer. That way I hoped to establish contact with more of the citizens. I do not remember getting to bed. The next morning I woke late. Melia was already up and watching me. I held my head. "I should not have drunk as much last night. Are you all right?" "Yes, master. I helped you to bed last night. I think you did drink a little too much, but I hope you are now well rested." I only groaned and ignored her insolence. "I see you have been up for a while." "Yes, I was outside in the morning sun, and then I had some clothes to wash." Eventually I struggled down to the main room. Melia had waited patiently until I was ready. "Not so any people here today?" I commented to the taverner. He shook his head. "Well, these executions are not so frequent, but we do a good trade when there is one." "Are you feeling all right, sir? You had a lot to drink last night." I squinted out the door at the gallows up on the hill. The most recent corpse was still there, but a small group were looking up at it. I noticed that even the magistrate and a soldier were there. "Something going on up there?" I asked. "Yes, I hear someone cut some of the lower clothes from the one who was hanged yesterday. We sometimes get that, people stealing clothes from the corpses. I suppose if you have been hanged you have no further uses for them," he laughed. "Whoever did it must have been in a hurry. They cut off some skin in their rush. But it was no help to them. Strange thing too, the clothes were left underneath the body. Maybe they got disturbed by something. Or maybe it was just some wild animals getting at the body. Anyway, now that it's naked maybe they'll just bury it a bit quicker than a week." "The other one too. I am tired of seeing them both up there. An execution is good for business, a dangling corpse is not. The sight puts off the customers." Melia seemed in a really good mood. She was even singing a little song as she went about her duties, so I left her about the tavern while I walked around the city to get the lie of the land and make preliminary plans. I soon found that the Count lived in a small castle on a mound just above the town, connected by a small road winding down from the castle. The city was set on a square whose main building was a large church, opposite to a smaller court building attached to a large hall, which I took as the main armory. On a whim I went into the church. As my eyes got accustomed to the gloom I saw that it was extremely plain. In fact I wondered if it was a church until I remembered that these Calvinists had done away with statues of the saints. However, I noticed that they had left the colored glass in the windows. A man was working around the altar, and when he noticed me he nodded to me and approached me. He was dressed very plainly in black robes. "I have not seen you here before. You new here?" "I am pastor in this church. My name is Theodore Schellenberg." We shook hands. "Greetings to you. I am Heinrich Muller." "Yes, I am new in this city, But I did see you before, at the execution a day ago. Yes, I heard from our guards that you had arrived here. He grimaced. Yes, the execution was of a robber. He had troubled us for some months, but he was caught last week. The magistrate gave him a speedy trial, and now God-fearing people can travel safely. Are you hoping to settle here? Yes, I replied. I am a refugee from further west. My religious views did not fit with the local authorities and I came here. He stood back to look at me better. Did you know that this is a Calvinist church? In fact, most of the area is Calvinist. You are familiar with our worship? Not entirely, but from what I have heard your worship fits closely with my own inclinations. Then I expect to see you at the church on Sunday. We expect that from all of our citizens. If you wish further instruction in our beliefs, or advice on our doctrine, I will be glad to help you. I should say too that the Count tries to be guided by our beliefs in his running of the city. I looked up to the castle through the open door. Does the Count come to the city much? Yes, it is an important part of his duties and he does not neglect them. He tries to govern as much as possible in accord with the dictates of our religion, so he is a faithful attender at church. I hear you are accompanied by a young woman. Is it your wife? You are married? He asked. No, I have not married yet. I am with my niece. She was orphaned. A look of suspicion passed over his features. You understand we permit no fornication here? I cursed inwardly. I would have to be careful. Yes, I know of that. I assure you. The girl is genuinely my niece. Her parents were killed in the fighting further west. She and I keep separate sleeping areas. I assure you that I will be chaste until I am married. I knew that the pastor would now let slip that I was unmarried and possibly looking for a bride. No doubt I would soon be a subject of gossip and probably the target of matrons wishing a spouse, preferably a rich one, for their unmarried daughters. Invitations to their homes might be another way of working my way into this society. On another matter too. I have heard it reported that you are fond of drink. We do not approve of drunkenness either. Then I will strive to be temperate. Thank you for the admonition, I said humbly. These Calvinist religious authorities had their noses in everybody's business, it seemed. What was your work? He asked. I was a merchant in spices. I may try that, but I have some medical knowledge. Perhaps I can find work as a physician. He grimaced. Fortunately in this city we are some distance apart from the wars in the Holy Roman Empire, so our men suffer few wounds, but there is always a need for healing after accidents and care of women in childbirth. The plague has not affected these parts much. God be praised. A word of advice to you, Herr Muller. The citizens here have known each other for years and trust each other. Not so with strangers. You may have trouble or have to wait some time before you are accepted. Yet, you seem like a responsible man. I wish you well. He nodded briefly. Then we will see you on the Sabbath. The grace of God be with you. Now, I have matters to attend to. He gave a faint smile. I have to plan Sunday's sermon. Good day to you. In truth, I had not been lying about fornication with my supposed niece. At this time I felt no desire for Melia, or any other woman, for that matter. I needed no distraction from my task. I thought I might marry some time, but it would be a marriage to further my own rank in society or for financial advantage. I would leave love, whatever that was, to those that believed in it. That was good news that the Count came to church regularly. It would allow me to plan the assassination better. I might be able to escape better in the crowd who would be panicked by the death. I had noticed that much of the church was of wooden construction. A fire would be a possible distraction. When I returned to the tavern and my rooms, I was immediately assaulted by a strong pungent smell. Melia was sitting over a simmering pot over a small fire, adding pieces of bark to the dark boiling liquid. I glared at her. What on earth are you doing, girl? Are you trying to poison the air? That smells terrible. In fact, she looked slightly guilty. No, master, I am just making some tannin mixture from oak bark. What is that used for? It is useful to have. It will help cuts heal quicker, and if I add iron to it I could make a dark blue dye. You can write with it, or even dye some cloth. That seemed a strange thing to be doing at this time, but who knows what motivated women, especially gypsy ones. Well, do not let it interfere with your other duties, I scolded. And make sure you are finished with it quickly. I do not want to be looking for fresh accommodation. Master, she added, that little book you got from the bishop. May I have it? I wish to look at it. I gave it to her. It was useless anyway, but it would keep her occupied. You can keep it, I said, until I return it to Alvarez. A day later I looked at her tannin pot. In it was a piece of what looked like pigskin. I wondered where she had got the skin. From the taverner, I supposed. The taverner had cooked some fresh pork the other day. When I asked her about it being pigskin, she just smiled and said that the leather would be useful to patch my clothes or my shoes. I started attending the church regularly, or at least whenever I thought the count would be there. I took Melia with me, but I was annoyed that I had to purchase some cloth and sewing supplies for her to make clothing similar to the other women's, as the clothes she had obtained after her release from prison, worn and faded as they were totally unsuitable for the religious services. In this city, blacks, grays and dark browns seemed to be favored colors for church services and even for general wear. Melia pouted a little about using subdued colors, but soon she was sewing away merrily and holding half-finished garments in front of her. She enjoyed it immensely, and her eyes sparkled. I gathered she had rarely worn absolutely new clothing. I even had to buy shoes and stockings for her. Many women went barefoot in these summer months, but if I was supposed to be a merchant or possibly a physician, keeping my niece well dressed would be an appropriate part of my disguise. I knew nothing about sewing then, but her efforts seemed to work well. Certainly the results showed she was a good seamstress. She even showed off her new clothes to me, and I pretended to be interested. As long as they were appropriate for the purposes, I was satisfied. After church that next Sunday, it was obvious that we were the object of more attention than usual. I had expected to be sought after by women looking for suitable matches for their daughters, but I was unprepared for the attention given to Melia by every unattached young man, it seemed. I even saw a few women looking enviously at her clothing. While she had made clothes that conformed to the general pattern and color in the city, she had added subtle touches that gave style to them. She carried herself well and her clothing suited her olive skin. By the time I extricated us both I was irritable, but Melia was in a fine mood, her head high, her shoulders back and stepping merrily alongside me in the boots that had cost me so much money. I found the church services strange at first. The service was totally in German, no Latin at all, and there was less to do than in the Catholic services that I had occasionally attended to placate the bishop. At least it gave me more of an opportunity to study the layout of the church when the pastor was not glaring at me in one of his interminable sermons. Most of the congregation sat on plain benches on the floor, but there were 2 balconies and the count and his family usually sat in a prominent enclosed part on one supplied with 2 doors, always with guards present. That balcony was quite high. I mused about pushing him over the edge to the stone flagstones below. He would be unlikely to survive, but the only access to either balcony was via a spiral stair. I would easily be trapped there, so I rejected that plan. So my plans needed some revision. What could I do that would be a good cover for my activities, and also get me access to the count? Time was passing by and I was getting desperate. I was about to try some reckless distance shot with a musket or a crossbow when a lucky course of events began. Melia had gone out to collect herbs, she said, and I was having a drink in the tavern with some of the citizens when I heard a commotion outside. There was a woman's voice, raised in fear, and I recognized it as Melia's. I ran outside and found a group of rowdies taunting her. I felt nothing for the girl, but she was supposed to be my niece and thus it was my duty to protect her. Also, if they abused one stranger, they might start on me. My sudden appearance, sword in hand, frightened the rowdies away, but Melia had been knocked to the ground, some herbs and plants strewn about her. I helped her up and she squeezed my hands in thanks. I would have left her then, but one of the retreating mob threw a stone which hit me on the head and partially dazed me. I also got a nasty cut to my forehead and I was almost blinded with my own blood. Melia screamed and helped me inside and up to our room. The taverner had seen my injury but Melia shooed him off. I did not think the cut was serious. I had had worse in the past. I would have to wear a bandage for some days and that would make me more noticeable, and I knew I would probably be left with a scar. That would be bad for my trade. The fewer noticeable marks I had the better. Melia washed the cut and examined it. I think it will heal well, master, she said, but a day later it began to pain me and I knew it was infected. I cursed, as this might delay my plans and thus my return. I complained to Melia. Master, please lie back. I wish to try something. I was irritated when I saw her bringing out the small book, the one with the spurious spells. What good is that supposed to be? I am going to use one of the spells. I laughed. Your stupid spell book. The spells do not work. Wait and see, was her reply. I looked at the book. Something did not seem the same. Then I noticed it had a cover. I asked her about it. Did you cover it with that piece of pigskin? Yes, master, I used a piece of skin, but not of a pig. I shook my head. Why waste a piece of leather, wherever it came from, on a book of rubbish such as that? She did not reply but flicked through the pages, opened the book fully, and began to read. The words were strange, like nothing I had ever heard, flowing sounds yet with a guttural tone. I jumped. My wound had started to sting, just enough to bring tears to my eyes, but almost as soon as it had come, the pain began to diminish and be replaced by a pleasant warmth. I tried to touch my wound but she held my hands. Just wait a minute, master, until the spell's work is finished. Spell? I asked. What do you mean? Just wait. In a minute she released my hands and held up a piece of polished metal mirror. I squinted in the dull surface, but I saw no wound or even a scar. Wondering, I touched where the wound had been. I felt only unblemished skin. What have you done? I asked. You mean these spells work? But the bishop tried them and said they were ineffective. He destroyed the original book. The new one was ineffective until it had some alterations. You see, all of the spells need the book to be covered in human skin for them to be effective. We did not tell the bishop that, even under torture. No, that would have been too dangerous a weapon for the likes of him. When we found the original book, which had a skin cover, had been destroyed, we were able to pretend that the spells were ineffective. And so they were, until the copy of the book was itself covered by human skin. But where did you get the skin? Then I remembered. Yes, it was from the unfortunate on the gallows. That night after the execution I slipped out of the tavern and cut some skin from his thighs and lower body. You remember the smelly tanning liquid? I used that to tan the skin to preserve it, and when it was ready I covered the book with it. I have also made another copy of the book. Then why are you trusting me with this knowledge? Perhaps you will be able to use the book to finish your task more quickly. Then we can return to Alvarez and I will free my brother. How do you know you can trust me? How do you know I will not slay you and use the book for my own ends? It could make me very rich. I do not know that. Actually, I do not trust you for that either. But for the present I am sure that we will work together. Our interests are common. I know that you are planning to kill the Count. If you are successful you will return to your reward, your money, but I have been promised much more, the freedom of my brother and what is left of my tribe. She looked at me and shook her head slowly. You are a strange, Cold man, Herr Muller. You have done me some kindnesses, but I wonder how much human emotion you feel. I should have beaten her for her words, yet I prided myself on my lack of sentimentality. The next day I was surprised to see the magistrate and an accompanying soldier in the tavern. "Ah, Herr Muller," exclaimed the taverner. "I was just coming to call on you. These gentlemen would like to speak with you." I felt my stomach tense. Had they found out my purpose here? I cursed inwardly. I had left my sword in my chamber, but I felt the comforting presence of my knife under my shirt. Perhaps I could make a run for it. It would mean leaving Melia, though. Did I owe her anything? Yes. Good morning, gentlemen. You wish to speak with me? The magistrate looked at my brow, as if scrutinizing it. Good morning to you, Herr Muller. We had information that some evenings ago there was an altercation here. That a group of troublemakers from the city had been here causing trouble with you and your niece. He looked at my head again. We were told that you had received a blow to your head, but I see no injury. Yes, there were several ruffians. They knocked my niece Melia to the ground. I rescued her, but I received only a slight injury. It also healed fast. Your informant must have been mistaken. Yet I have just been speaking to the taverner. He also remembers you bleeding. Ah well, perhaps he was mistaken. Now, Herr Muller, I know that these are times of war, and that our state may be drawn into this dreadful conflict, but we seek to establish a just society here, and we will not tolerate unseemly behavior, especially against visitors. We have the rowdies under guard. You wish to swear a complaint against them? I thought briefly. This would give me more attention than I wanted, and yet, I did not want Melia or myself to be known as easy prey. It was bad enough that we were strangers in the city, I am not sure, not for myself, but as my niece was involved too, I will ask her. When I asked Melia, she was insistent about swearing out a complaint. We are supposed to be bona fide visitors who may settle here. I think we should. Also, these men are the same type as Alvarez, who abuse the weak. So she had not forgotten Alvarez. As it happened, it was fortunate she did make a formal complaint with the magistrate. The men were brought before the magistrate and sentenced to flogging. If I had doubts about my course of action, they were dispelled when we had the thanks of some of the citizens. These men had caused much trouble in the past, was a common sentiment. The magistrate even thanked us. Many of our own citizens here, he said, have been in too much fear of these men. You have performed a good service. That was to the good. The more goodwill I had from the responsible citizens, the less suspicion I would be under. But then he continued, I heard that you used your sword on the men. I have also been told that you appear fairly skilled with arms. You are very fortunate to be so skilled, far more than many merchants or physicians would be. There was a sly smile on his face, and I cursed my carelessness. Still, I had had no choice, either that or let Melia be injured. My father was a soldier, I lied. He made sure that my brothers and I were instructed in the use of arms. I practice regularly too. A good thing I did. Yes, you were fortunate indeed. That night in bed I mused about using the book to further my plans, but I did not see how healing spells would be of any use. Actually, I had little desire to use a magic book. It was simply too dangerous in these times. None of the opposing parties in these continuing religious wars would have had much tolerance of sorcery, or magic, or whatever they called it. Except Alvarez, of course. He might approve of its spells if they gave him advantage, but possibly, since I knew its secrets, my life would be in danger. Through the pastor I heard of a small residence that was for rent, and after inspection we shifted to there. Melia would have to do more cooking and housework, but these would be expected of her, being a woman. With Melia, I continued to attend the church services, gradually getting to know the congregation and the citizens, but access to the count eluded me. I fretted. I had been here well over a month now, and still my mission was not accomplished. I had made a passing acquaintance with several citizens, but that had not led to anything. On the other hand, Melia seemed to have made a number of friends, mainly young men. I was not surprised. Her attractive exotic looks and her smart dress would be sure to attract men. She was especially friendly with one who even came to call on her. I did not object. The girl was of no interest to me, and the friendship might lead to other doors being opened. Usually the Count and his wife were accompanied by their 3 children at church services, but one day I saw another very young girl, barely more than a child, with them. As the child looked around, I noticed there was something strange about her face. Then as she turned more fidgeting in the sermon despite her mother's vain attempts to keep her still, I saw the girl suffered from an extremely bad hair lip. A physician might sew the lip together, but it would always be unsightly. Such a pity for the girl. She would have trouble eventually marrying. "Did you see the girl?" asked Melia as we strolled back to the tavern. "Yes, what about her?" "She has a hair lip. My spells could cure that, and the Count would be very grateful, don't you think? He might then trust you and you would have access to him." My hopes rose. She was right. At last I might have an opening, but then I hesitated. "If I used a magic spell," I said slowly, "how would that be perceived by the Count or his wife? And what about the pastor? Would I be accused of sorcery?" Melia saw my dilemma. Mothers want what is best for their children. Despite the doctrines, beliefs, or teachings of men, women are more practical. If you cure the girl, you will have the Countess' eternal gratitude, and she will make sure her husband the Count will voice no objections. He will be concerned to keep it secret. You can be sure too that even if the religious authorities did hear about it, they will act in their best interests, that is to keep the goodwill of the Count and raise no objections. Then the next thing is to contact the Countess, but how do we do that? Leave that to me. In fact, it was only 2 days later when we received a summons to the castle and a letter delivered by one of the pages in the castle. "How did you manage that?" I asked Melia. "You have your mind too much on other things, Herr Muller," she smiled. "There is a young man I met at church who I think is very interested in me, and he lives at the castle. I asked him to speak to the Countess. Something was not quite right. And how friendly are you with this man?" "What is his name?" I asked. "He is called Johann. He is the young man who comes to call on me. He is a younger brother of the Countess. He thinks I'm your niece." So Melia's looks had opened doors for me that my own efforts had not. "If you are friendly with this Johann, then what of the future? You know my purpose here. That will cause turmoil, and he would be affected. How fond are you of him?" She looked at me steadily. "My first duty is to my brother. I would do nothing that would jeopardize his being freed." She sounded quite cold-blooded about the situation. I wondered if I had a kindred spirit in the girl. She seemed to have an intense, emotionless, single-minded purpose. "Then how will we handle this?" "I suppose you will use a spell right away. First you will ask your God's blessing. That may soften any complaints of their consciences. I think you should be the one to read the spell. After all, I am supposed to be your niece." The next morning we walked up the winding path to the castle and showed the letter of admission. In a few minutes we were brought before the Count von Meissner and his family. I found out the Count was called Gustav, and his wife Dagmar. The reception was actually cold. The Countess was very suspicious while the Count was visibly uneasy. Only Johann was friendly. I brushed off any comments about magic and said that the book was a copy of an ancient one, passed down from the Israelites. This only partially reassured them, but in a minute the Countess summoned a maid who then brought in her daughter. The girl would have been quite pretty, with red hair and a very fair complexion, but for her deformity. Melia had given me the book before we had left the house, and I pulled it from my leather case. To my amazement, the Count dismissed the maid and both of his guards from the room. This was my opportunity to carry out the assassination, and yet I hesitated. I do not know why. I had no weapons, but I could have easily slain him with my hands. Perhaps I knew it was still too risky with being in the castle and 2 guards outside the door. So I only turned to the page Melia had indicated and nervously began to read the spell. It was a good thing I had looked at it before, as the words were awkward and I stumbled over them many times. As soon as I was done, I uttered a Christian prayer, in a style I had copied from the preacher, and nervously watched the girl. She sat unconcernedly on her mother's knee holding a doll. I was holding my breath. I looked at the girl's parents. The Count was still staring at me with mild distrust, and the Countess was biting her lip. Only Melia was unmoved. I began to worry, and I thought of the special gallows. Then, in less than a minute, the girl let out a small cry and clapped her hand to her mouth. Her mother gently removed it, and we watched as the cleft in the upper lip began redden, then to repair, slowly filling in as the flesh expanded to hide the cleft, and then formed a delicate pretty upper lip. The girl was squealing slightly, but that soon stopped. Her mother looked at her, her jaw dropping in amazement, and then burst into tears and hugged the child. The Count was shaking his head slowly as if in disbelief. This will last? It is permanent? Yes, my lord, said Melia. Your daughter will be pretty now. I would not have believed it, he said. Such was the power of the Israelites. And the mercy of God, I said piously. His name be praised. The more I downplayed the power of the book, the better. How can I reward you? Asked the Count. I shook my head. I pretended to think. 2 ways. Please do not mention this to anyone, and we really seek no monetary reward. If you wish, give another donation to the church. Some money would have been welcome, but this way we would keep in the good graces of the Count and perhaps even the church. The Count even embraced me. We are very grateful to you, Herr Muller. You and your niece will stay and dine with us tonight? So at last I had gained access to the Count. Now I had to build on this bit of trust and then strike when I had my plans made. The meal was very pleasant, and in reply to the inquiries of the Count and Countess, we let it be known that although I had used some healing arts, successfully, thanks to God's mercy, I was really interested in setting up as merchant to trade in spices. Melia sat with us, too. The Count had even invited Johann to sit with us. When we parted later, some Johann saw us out. He embraced Melia briefly. A successful evening, master? Asked Melia, as we walked down from the castle. Yes, I would like to thank you. I have made more progress today than in the last month. What did you think of the Count? My friend, Johann, thinks highly of him. I think all of the citizens respect him. That is no concern of mine. I have a contract to fill. That was not the last time we were invited back to the castle. A week later we were invited to help heal a bad cut on one of the stablemen, and we found ourselves at dinner again. The Count and I were soon at ease with each other, and a day later he invited me to a hunt with him. That should have been a great opportunity for me, but there were about a dozen more of the Count's subjects there. I considered a shot from ambush, but the chance never presented itself. At last the opportunity came. We had been invited to dinner with the Count and Countess in celebration of their eldest son's birthday. Johann was not to be there. He was off on some diplomatic business to the north. I resolved to make an end to the affair. What method are you going to use, master? Melia always used master or Herr Muller when we were alone. Otherwise, as appropriate for my supposed niece, she called me Uncle Heinrich if with other people. I think a knife. I can quickly cut their throats and be out of the building. Master, I have been able to get the ingredients together for a poison, yet is tasteless and fast-acting. I think that would be better. I have some in a vial. She handed me a small glass bottle. Here is enough to kill 2 people. Where did you get this? I asked. I distilled it from some herbs. In truth, Melia had continually been working on collecting plants and making potions almost since we arrived. The tanning solution for that piece of human skin had been only the first in a long line of her strange brews. "You are a marvel, Melia," I said. "But you did not want to use it on me?" I smiled at her. She gave a grin. "No, master, I need you alive and well for our return to Alvarez to save my brother." The next evening I made our final preparations. "So, now I am ready," I said. "Are you?" We had gone over our plans and rehearsed the possible scenes many times. "Yes." Melia looked very serious. She was pale. I hoped her look would not warn the Count that something was amiss. She was to carry the vial of poison. We were given easy entrance to the castle. By now the guards were used to us, and, besides, we had a pass written by Countess Dagmar. A page took us to a long corridor to the Count and Countess, presented us and left. We were warmly greeted by both, and soon the Count dismissed the two guards and led us into their dining room. The meal had several courses, the highlight being a dish of roast boar with small quail. The cook had outdone himself. The wine flowed freely, and soon our conversation was laced with laughter. Remembering past experiences, I was careful how much I drank, but pretended to be getting quite jolly. Throughout the whole meal the conversation was light and friendly, even relaxed. The Count finally offered me help in influencing the elders of the city in getting my supposed spice business established. I even felt a slight feeling of regret for what I was about to do. It was getting late and we knew there would be a toast. I had reserved the poison for that. In accord with our plans, I drew on a humorous tale from my past, and with great drama I acted out the part of a prosperous burgher. Both Gustav and Dagmar were beside themselves with laughter, and as their backs were turned, I saw Melia slip some of the vial into their 2 wine glasses. She brought them over to us, and I carefully selected one. Melia too selected an unpoisoned one, and in minutes, with a toast to our futures, we downed them. I was surprised with the rapidity of the poison. It was scarcely a minute before both Count and Countess frowned, then made uncomfortable expressions, grabbed their throats, and with contorted features sank to the ground. Gustav tried to point at me but gave a weak croak and collapsed completely. There had been hardly a sound. I waited another minute, then examined the Count. He had stopped breathing and I could detect no pulse. I gave Melia a look of triumph. She looked pale and shuddered. "It is a terrible thing to kill people, especially those that trusted you," she whispered. I had no quarrel with the Count and Countess, but I was paid to kill them. I felt a brief regret at leaving their children orphaned, but I shook the feeling off. Other children in these dangerous times had suffered just as much. Now, on our way. As we had planned, we donned our cloaks, and with hearty wishes, to the supposed still hale and hearty Count and his wife, we opened the door to the hall. "The Count does not wish to be disturbed," said Melia. "He is feeling amorous," she whispered with a grin. The guard nodded, grinned back, and waved us down the hall. I forced myself to walk casually. A few minutes more and we were out of the castle. More still and we were at our rooms collecting our necessities. Yet more and we were riding frantically to the river that marked the boundary of the Count's state as fast as our horses would go. With luck the Count's death would be unnoticed until dawn. Just over the boundary river we finally rested. "Do you feel any regret at their deaths?" asked Melia. "They were fine people and they trusted us." "A little. I agree that they were a pleasant couple, I suppose," I grinned, "except to alchemists. I had no quarrel with them, but that does not matter. I had contracted to kill them." "Then do you feel triumph at furthering the ambitions of the bishop?" "I suppose he will be happy, but more to the point is that he will pay me well. Another such job and I will have the money I need to secure my future." "What about your Johann?" "I am sure he would be horrified at any killing, but my responsibility is to my brother Astrid first." The rest of our journey only took another 2 days, and while we wasted no time, we had no cause to worry about pursuit as we were well away from the boundary of von Meissner's small state. At Alvarez's mansion we announced ourselves to the guards and were brought before him right away. When I recounted all that had passed, he listened attentively, and as I described the Count's last minutes, a feral smile passed over his features. "You are really sure the Count is dead?" he asked. "I am certain. I waited 5 minutes, but I felt no pulse." "I checked also," said Melia. "There were no signs of life." Alvarez gave a howl of triumph. "A real victory for the Church," he cried. "A pity the death was not dishonorable, but it cannot be helped. Now that the city is leaderless, we can invade and destroy our enemies utterly." "Ah, I suppose you want your money." He shook his head. "You do not seem to celebrate the victory of our righteous cause?" It would help to humor him. "Of course I do. I just suppose I am tired from all of our efforts. But it is a great victory for us. I am happy to have helped our just cause." Then, just in case he conveniently forgot, "but as we agreed, I will need my recompense." Yes, I know." Alvarez waved his hand dismissively. "This is a great day. I know what to do. I will summon a great assembly of our leaders here. It will be a great celebration, and then we will present you with your reward." "Ah, we should have something extra." "No, we will give you your fee first, but use the celebration for presentation of a fine medal for your services to the Church. There will be our Count, his family, the whole court and their ladies, and all the senior figures of the diocese. Ah, it will be a great day. How the cathedral bells will ring." I noticed that Melia's eyes were shining with excitement. "That is wonderful for you, master," she said, looking at me. I wondered why she should enjoy the bishop's triumph so much. He had done her no kindness, and she appeared to have had some regrets, despite planning my use of poison. Alvarez must have finally noticed her presence too. He scowled at her. "Did this girl serve you well?" "Yes," I said, "she helped well. Without her help I could not have succeeded. She was invaluable." "Please, Your Excellency," said Melia. "I have served Herr Muller well and faithfully. I have done all that was asked, and more. Now what about my brother? And the rest of my people? You promised their release." The bishop looked at her irritably. "You are insolent, gypsy girl. Remember your place, but yes, I will release your brother. There is one other woman too. The rest have died." He called an order to a guard, and turned to Melia. "They will be here presently. You will remember too that I expect you all to leave this area within the week, and never return." Melia's shoulders had hunched and I saw a tear at her eye. "Only 2 left," I heard her mutter under her breath. "Then, a week will be all that I need." "Thank you, Your Excellency." I wondered why she was being so obsequious, but she was a much different person with Alvarez than she had been when alone with me. In minutes the guards brought in 2 pathetic figures. A man and a woman, both in filthy rags. The man's face was gaunt, and from what I could see of his arms, he was reduced to almost skin and bone. Melia gave a small scream and ran to help him. She embraced him, crying. I watched them impassively. The other woman was scarcely any better. Melia embraced her too. "It is my aunt," she explained. "I must take them and care for them. Master, can we use your room? There is space there." The bishop looked at me. "You permit this?" "It is a small thing," I said. "She has helped me, and she will soon be away from here." I looked at Melia. "Yes, you may use my quarters." I waved her away irritably. As soon as they had gone, the bishop had me recount again and again the details of my mission. Yet I omitted the information about the magic book. Melia had helped me, and I also felt that I might use it sometime. I wondered how I could get a copy from her, but I thought it too dangerous for Alvarez to know about it. The book had healing spells, but who knows what use a man like Alvarez would put them to. I supposed that Melia and her brother would soon depart. They had been given 7 days. That would take them some days past the bishop's victory celebrations. Perhaps their departure from the city would be another small victory for him. Heinrich, I have much to attend to in the city, and I will have to stay there for some days. But you are welcome to use my house here. Even the gypsies. I will give the servants orders that you are to be given all help. That way you can relax after your efforts. But just one thing. Come and dine with me tomorrow in the city to go over some final things with my superiors. When I returned to my quarters, Melia had a stricken bed. He had been washed and she was feeding him some soup. He still looked frail, but it was as if there was now some glow about him. The woman was in better health, sitting at the fire and also supping soup. The next day Melia was still continually attending to her brother, but he looked a different man, and by that afternoon he was up and walking about. Melia had me continually ordering food for him from Alvarez's kitchen, and she even begged some of my older clothes for him. Perhaps you will not be needing these, sir. You will soon have fresh clothes. She was right. With my reward I would be able to get new clothes to replace the ones I had worn on my assignment. Yes, Melia, take what you wish. Oh, we will be staying here for at least until the celebration. Bishop Alvarez has given us use of his house as he will be occupied in the city for several days. I am to banquet with him tomorrow evening. The next evening, as I returned from banqueting with Alvarez and his superiors in the city, Melia welcomed me back to our chambers. Master, I would like to thank you, she said, for what you have done for me. You helped me once. I will always remember that. Thank you, I said. Melia? I asked. That magic book of yours. Would it be possible for me to have a copy? I sat down heavily, hiccuping. I must have overindulged at Alvarez's. She poured a glass of wine for me. Let me think, master, how I can do this. I will fetch it. She went to her pack and pulled out the book. She said something to her brother that I did not understand. Something in the gypsy language, I suppose, then opened the book. Excuse me, Herr Muller, he said. I think I will take a walk outside. Almost absent-mindedly Melia turned over the pages. This is a powerful book, she said slowly, and flicked through the pages again. She laughed at one. These are old sounds, from an ancient language. She poured me yet more wine. Yes, I will let you use the book, but, master, are you able to read it? Here, try reading this part. She put the pages in front of my eyes and I peered at the strange words. They were certainly in neither German, Latin, nor French. This is the spell we used for the Count's daughter's cleft lip. Try reading it again. You mispronounced some of the words when you used it. Fortunately, it still worked. I struggled through the words and my alcoholic haze until I had read them all. Well, master, said Melia, I think that shows an improvement. You should be able to read them all. She poured me some more wine and turned over more pages. How about this one? Can you read it? Again I stumbled through the words, but I was finished in less than a minute. What spell was that? I asked. Oh, another one for some medical improvements, Melia said mysteriously. I wanted to ask her which, but I had drunk too much. I felt lazily happy. All had worked out well. I had carried out my task, so I would get my rewards. It looked like I would get some type of medal too. I did not care for the honor, but perhaps it would bring more assignments to me. I felt a brief shiver. Melia noticed it too. I see things are beginning to work, master. You never did read all of the spells before, did you? Certainly not that one. What do you mean? I asked. You should have been more careful of what you read, master. You have just uttered the words of one of my spells, so it will soon affect you. Ah, but I have no birthmarks or hunched back, I laughed. I hiccuped. But then I had a growing sense of unease at the look in her eyes. What spell had I read out? Give me your hands, master, said Melia. Almost automatically I held them out, but she took a rope and tied my wrists together. I was so befuddled with the wine that my struggles against her were futile. With a desperate effort I managed to rise, but she pushed me back onto the bench, took another rope and tied my ankles. Then she gagged me. I struggled against the ropes, and I felt the rope on my wrists coming free, but she noticed it too and slipped another loop over and tightened that too. I glared at her. I would have shouted, but I could only make grunting sounds. She leaned over me. Now listen, Herr Muller. What you have just read was another spell, but not one for a medical remedy. It was a special one that will change a man to a woman. It was at the back of the book. I do not think you ever read as far as that. Any time you had the book in your hands you only skimmed it briefly. But at the back was this powerful spell, one that changes men into women. There is also a reverse spell, and a spell for women into men. That did not make sense. I tried to rise, but the wine's effect was too strong. I felt another stronger shiver. I struggled to concentrate on what she was saying. Herr Muller, master, I perhaps owe you my life. I am going to try to save your life. No, not your physical life, but perhaps your emotional life, your soul, as you Christians call it, to make you a whole human being. You have little passion or reason for living. When did you last experience pleasure? You do not kill not for pleasure. It is only something you fell into. Maybe once there was a reason, but it has long gone. If I were to kill you, I think you might even view the prospect of your death with the same lack of emotion that you feel in the rest of your life. Yet I think there may be some humanity that still stirs within you. You saved me from a mob. You did not abuse me or beat me. There were other small kindnesses. For those I will spare your life. You gave me my life, I will give you life, but another than you have, another chance. Still, to make sure you do not fall into the same old habits, I will make that impossible. Your new life will become more controlled by emotions. You will feel life with more passion, be more aware of your body and what it can do. My stomach began to shrink with dread. You are going to become a woman, a beautiful one, with a body and face that will attract men. Men will desire you, they will strive for your attention, they will vie with each other. You will be like a woman internally as well as externally. Your mind too will adjust eventually, so that you will begin to think as women do and have the same feelings, emotions, needs and desires as women. That is what is in store for you. You may adjust rapidly, you may take months, but it will happen. She must have noticed the horror in my eyes. Yes, you will eventually discover your own passion as the spell begins to work on your mind. You will desire men, to be close to them. Then you will want one special man, to hold him and be held by him. You will want his kisses on your lips and his hands caressing your eager body. You will want him in you, but you will experience indecision and second, even third thoughts. These feelings will face you, but the indecision and emotions bubbling within you will make you much more of a human being than you have ever been. I had a strong shivering spell. You are having spells of shivering, I see. That is the beginning of the spell taking hold. The shivering will become stronger and you will soon fall unconscious while your body begins its transformation. You will be insensible about a day and a half. When you wake up you will feel sore and worn out, but you will have female body and face. You will soon feel better, but your male hair will soon fall out. I managed to slip the gag. How many others have been transformed? I gasped. My voice sounded hoarse. She gagged me again. Personally, I have changed only one person before you. My mother several, but we use these spells with discretion. usually only for real friends. I doubt that you have thought of us as friends, yet you saved me once. You were a fair, if distant master. You did not beat me or use me. For that I am grateful enough to help you to a new life. I tried to grab her with my bound hands, but she easily held them down. I have no doubt that you will eventually have children and experience not only the passion and ecstasy of starting children, but the satisfaction and pride of feeling them growing inside you, your body changing in preparation for giving birth and motherhood. I hope you will also experience the pain of bearing children, yet you will be flooded with tender and maternal thoughts as you suckle your infants, seeing the fruit and labors of your own body. She took my face in her hand and looked into my eyes. If you are fortunate, you will feel a continuing love for your husband, and he for you. You will feel a passion for your children. They will be more dear to you than your own life. You will protect them with your whole being. Another even stronger shiver took me, so that my teeth began to chatter. I could not control my body at all, and my vision was growing dark. She began to remove the clothes from me, as much as my ropes allowed. She held my face to stop me looking away. Most of your men's clothes will not fit you. You should know that I will give you a peasant woman's clothes. These will be more suitable for the female body you will acquire. You will find out when you awaken. She had barely removed all of my clothes except for my shirt when I felt a series of strong shivers. I tried to speak more, but I was taken with such a violent fit of shivering that my teeth were chattering as if they would break. I could not keep my eyes open and I felt darkness closing in on me. I barely remember how I began to be aware of things again. I was aware of a great lassitude, of a deep ache in my muscles, spasms of pain that cramped my belly, a feeling of nausea, and an ache in my head. Someone was wiping my brow, but I could not move. Sometime later I awoke again, still to pain, but not as much as before. I felt a cup of water at my lips. I was desperately thirsty and I licked it through parched lips. My tongue felt swollen. I tried to raise myself, but the effort was too much. I allowed myself to fall asleep again. It was not so bad when I woke again. My body still ached, but not as much as before. I groaned when I felt arms pull my shoulders so that I was sitting up, then a cushion was at my back to support me and a cup of water at my lips. I tried to drink it but I spluttered and much ran down my chin. Someone began washing my face again and bathing my eyes. They were crusted shut but I forced them open. Melia's face swam before me and I had to struggle to focus my eyes. She offered me more water and I drank it greedily, more controlled this time, but my mouth seemed a different shape. "How do you feel?" she asked. "The spell has been quite severe on you. I thought I had lost you." Her words made no sense and thinking was too much of an effort, but as I hunched over in bed, things became clearer. Spell? Oh yes, Melia had threatened to use a spell that would, what was it she had said? Had I been ill? Then I remembered it was to make me into a woman. Almost at the same time I realized my body felt different. I looked at my arms, now slimmer and rounded. Something was also wrong with my chest. I grabbed at it, feeling the flesh projecting, far more than any male chest, however muscled. I opened my shirt, fumbling with the fastenings as my fingers seemed to have lost their coordination. In exasperation I looked at them. They were shaped differently, longer and slimmer somehow. My hands were narrower and smaller too. Finally I undid all my buttons and gaped at my chest. Nestled in my black chest hair were two prominent breasts, each tipped with brown nipples and areolas. The breasts of a woman. Whimpering, in a desperate hope, I tried to push them off my chest, but it was painful. My chest felt rough hands pulling at it. My own hands felt warm ripe softness, but which would not detach. I screamed in terror and tried to climb off the bed, but Melia held me to restrain me. I pushed her away and threw off the sheets totally. I looked at my belly and below. I shouted. No, it was more of a female scream. My manhood was gone completely. In their place was a mound, and below that soft flesh, with a vertical cleft and folds of skin. I opened my legs and felt a small sensitive projection, and yet further, into another set of lips, and a moist opening. I felt in it, then jerked as the realization hit me. These were the parts of a woman. I was a female. What have you done? I screamed in a shrill female voice. I have done what I said would do, she said calmly. I have made you into a woman. Accept it. A new life is ahead of you, and hopefully you will make it a better life than your previous. I finally managed to get to my feet. My legs too had changed proportion. I gasped at my hips. They were wide, flaring out from a narrow waist. I lunged at her. You witch! Turn me back. I am a man. I have things to do. Melia was much stronger than me and pushed me back. I had shrunk so that I was barely as tall as her. You are no longer a man. You never will be again. The sooner you accept it, the better. No, look, I am really man. I still have a man's hair. She seized my weak arm and pulled at the hairs on them. I felt only a slight stinging as it pulled off easily, leaving only a few fine hairs. See, even that will be gone. You will have the hair pattern of a woman. She pulled at the hair on my chest. It too pulled off with only a slight resistance. Ignoring my screaming, she kept pulling until the breasts were almost hairless. It even made them more prominent. That will go too, in a day or two. She pulled at the hair of my beard and mustache. These too pulled out easily. I shrieked and felt at my face. It would be as hairless as a woman's. I tried to struggle again, but she pushed me down and snapped a manacle on my arm. I screamed and tugged at it, but it was well bolted to the bed. I am tired of your struggles. That will hold you while you get used to this. Now I have things to attend to. She left, leaving me struggling with the chain, but it was too firmly fastened. I screamed and shouted, but no one came. At last I dissolved in tears of frustration. I was relieved when Melia returned. Please have mercy, I pleaded. Accept it, she said stonily. It was either that or I kill you. By the way, I have let it be known that you have a fever possibly related to the plague. No one will dare come to help you. They will put your screams down to delirium. What day is this? I asked. It is almost 2 days since you read the spell. It is the day before you are supposed to get your great celebration. My money, I gasped. Melia shook her head sadly. So one of the first things you think about is still money. But you can set your mind at rest. The bishop delivered your gold to us yesterday. I told him you had a fever and could not see him. You will be interested to know that he did not wish to see you either. Your bishop always looks out for his own health, but I said that you would be at the celebration, that I felt you would have recovered by then. We have arranged a balcony for you to watch the proceedings, but you will be kept far enough away that you do not infect them with your supposed illness. However, I will disguise as strict as you, and he can stand well apart from all so that no one will see his disguise. He will even say a few words of thanks to the audience for the medal for your services. However, I will also have something to say to all of the assembled dignitaries. I will let you watch. I cried and pleaded most of that day, but eventually I fell asleep. I awoke the next morning ravenously hungry, and with only a trace of aches. How do you feel now? I trusted you, I said bitterly. You betrayed me. She laughed. That from one who as man made a profession out of murder and betrayal. I will have my revenge. I will make you change me back, I hissed. You will not make demands. You will do as we say. If you do not, I will kill you. She left me much to myself the next 2 days, although chained to the bed. Food and drink were brought regularly. She also left a chamber pot. I attempted to use it standing up but gave up in disgust and endured the humiliation of squatting on it. I kept myself covered as much as I could to avoid looking at my new body, but was constantly aware of its changed shape, especially of the weight and bulk of the breasts on my chest. The third day, Melia, her aunt, and one of Alvarez's maids descended on me. I tried to tell the maid of my changes and betrayal, but she just looked at me as if I was mad, shook her head, and carried on. I struggled, but I was still weak and anyway no match for them as they unchained me, stripped me naked, washed me and toweled every inch of me vigorously. They were not gentle and I winced as rough towels scoured my skin. At last they were satisfied and watched as I cried, red and tingling, standing in my female nakedness. I had no vestiges of male hair left, only hair in my armpits and a soft oval at my groin. I had never felt so helpless and bewildered. I could not ignore my new body. I could not but help seeing the swellings of my breasts. That was the worst. I might ignore the loss of the parts between my legs, but these breasts were almost always in my sight. They and their purposes were always in my mind. Below their swelling I saw a slim waist with generous hips and buttocks below that. A woman's hips, childbearing hips. The spell has worked well, said Melia, when the maid had left. You need not have tried to get any sympathy from the maid. I told her you were a sister of mine that suffered from delirium. That Alvarez's prison had affected your mind. Anyway, you should be pleased with your beauty. You have a pretty face, a shapely body and long legs. You will be valued more that way. Your beauty will also give you more power, if you use it wisely. Have a look at your face. You haven't seen your face. I think many women will be jealous. She lifted a piece of mirror to me and held it up to my face. I did not want to look at it, but she held it right in front of me so that I could not avoid it. In it was a beautiful dark-haired girl with dark shining hair, delicate eyebrows, a small pert nose but generous lips and a small but determined chin. The picture was spoiled by her gray eyes. They were cloudy and red with crying. Now, time you got dressed. As a woman. A maid dumped a pile of women's clothing in the chair and Melia pointed to it. I screamed in anger and kicked it over. I am a man. I demand to be restored immediately. Melia took me by my shoulders. You are no longer a man. Your time of demands is over, for good. You had better learn a new way, perhaps the use of feminine wiles. I advise you to accept your new existence and begin by putting on these clothes. We will begin your training. You should thank us that we are willing to do so. Never then we will have to persuade you. No food or blankets for you until you do. They removed all blankets from the bed and any scraps of cloth so that I had nothing but the women's clothing. If I wanted to keep warm I had no recourse but to dress in it. I resisted shivering all of that night. In the morning I was thirsty and my stomach was cramping with hunger. By the middle of the morning I started to put on the women clothing, as much as I could do, and sat down, wiping tears from my eyes. An hour later Melia returned with a tray of food. I sat down and wolfed it, then looked up at her expectantly. That is a good start. Now stand up. She looked me up and down and straightened my clothing. The skirt came to my ankles, I could feel it rubbing against them as I moved. I felt my sensitive nipples rub against the fabric of my blouse. That is good. You will have to learn posture and how to move, but I think you will manage. You can go barefoot at first, but if you are good I will give you clogs or boots for the ceremony. I made more protests, half-heartedly, but I knew she would not be persuaded. She had given me petticoats, a skirt and a rough blouse. I swore under my breath that I would make her pay dearly and began to scheme how I could trick her to get changed back. The next day, at the time for the ceremony, Melia, Astrick and their aunt moved me to the balcony. I think she must have earlier given me a drug as I could make no resistance, or cry out. In my drugged state I was in no position to resist as she dressed me as a peasant woman. In an embroidered blouse and a longish black skirt with a lacy type of over-apron or skirt. On my feet were tan women's boots. I had been given a kerchief to cover my shortish hair. Melia was dressed in some of the clothes she had made earlier, but with a crimson shawl over her shoulders. She looked exotic and beautiful, a far cry from the forlorn gypsy girl I had met months back. Her brother was wearing some of my own clothes. They even got 2 servants to help them move me into a carriage, and we set off to the celebration. I watched helplessly in my female garb as the ceremony began with a great procession of all of the dignitaries. Soon Alvarez was on the podium in his element, describing the contribution I had made and, gesturing to our isolated seats of honor in the balcony, there was thunderous applause as her disguised brother rose to take the acclamation that should have been mine. Melia nudged me. Now I take my revenge. She rose to speak, and I watched helplessly as she stood up in the balcony in full view and clear hearing of Alvarez and the other bishops and the archbishop, the duke, his ministers, and all the assembled courtiers, even the army commander and most of his officers. Melia then began to speak to them in German, explaining the outcome of my mission and how she had been glad to help. Then she made a signal with her hand, and I saw her brother rise and leave. In a strong, clear voice she began to read from the book. I still could not move, and I was bewildered with her actions, until I began to recognize some of the words. She was reading the same spell that I had inadvertently used. I tried to sound a warning, but I could barely manage a whisper. The audience looked at her, mystified. The bishop had an exasperated face, perhaps wondering if she had gone mad. There was a rising murmur among the dignitaries, but in a minute she had finished her reading and deferred to Alvarez. She sat down beside me. "Watch what happens." I saw Alvarez, full of his own importance, flushed with his success, rise and begin to make another speech. He was barely 5 minutes into it when he hesitated as if a thought had struck him. His shoulders hunched slightly and he resumed his speech. Then a minute later there was another pause and a definite shiver. He was frowning, then a minute later an even stronger shiver took him that made him stumble. Another, and he sank to his knees. He was no longer talking. Only a croak came from his mouth. Some of the assembled guests rose in alarm, then they too sank to their knees or onto chairs. Some collapsed onto the stone floor. Alvarez's hand went to his throat and he tried to point to Melia, but his arm wavered and sank. Then I watched with awe as he and all the throng slowly fell under the spell, the same that had taken me, one by one collapsing on the floor. There were occasional cries and screams, dying away to moans, softer and softer. The only noise was panicked screaming from a group of terrified nuns and the wives of courtiers. I watched in dread and horror, barely able to move. In a minute her brother returned, pulling wax plugs from his ears. They lifted me and we made our way to the stables. We were unopposed. I think all of the servants must have been at the supposed celebration. Any women would have been almost unaffected, but they would be too busy with the stricken men inside the chamber. Soon we were in a carriage heading out of the city. "Where are we going?" I asked. My drugs seemed to be wearing off. "Why, back to see the Count and my Johann." I was mystified. "But the Count is dead, the Countess too. If the citizens recognize you they will execute you. Even as a woman I will not be safe." Melia laughed. "You will be pleased to know that both will be very much alive. You see, the supposed poison was only a drug, one that very temporarily gave the appearance of death. I gave you a reduced dose to keep you quiet during the ceremony. But they will still know I tried to kill them." They both became unconscious. Unconscious, yes, but they were part of my plot. You see, I colluded with them. You were sent to assassinate the Count. But I saw he was a decent man and I informed them about you and your plans, and Alvarez's plotting. I wanted revenge and we decided to use you as an access for me to destroy the bishop and his scheme, in fact his whole society. Of course, rescue of my brother was my own priority, and yes, revenge for what Alvarez did. All of my small tribe except for me, my brother and aunt died in his prison. You believed you had been successful, but in reality we used you to get me back to Alvarez. Then I rescued what remained of my tribe and destroyed him. I did not expect to have access to their whole nobility, but that made my revenge sweeter. There is a legend among my people that in ancient times the spell was used to destroy an army. I had intended to drug you to use the woman's spell on you, but when you got drunk it was too good an opportunity to miss. Of course, I also rescued you from your past and gave you a new future, as I have explained. I closed my eyes in despair. She had truly fooled me. Now, you that were her Muller, we have to find a new name for you, one that will suit your new body. I think we need a nice feminine name that will suit your new body and pretty face. Let me see. How about Magda? I believe it means maiden. That will suit your new status. Never, I screamed. Then I tailed off. I wished I could control my voice more and get myself under control. Deep in my heart too I knew that I had no hope of changing back. So Melia had her revenge. As she had said, the spell was severe. It nearly killed me, a young healthy man as I had been. I later heard that more than half of the attendees at the celebration died that day, most of the older and thus usually the more experienced and influential members of the court. I heard that Alvarez was one of those that died. Those that survived, mostly the younger ones, suddenly found themselves in strange unfamiliar bodies. As women, their status was changed irrevocably. Some were viewed as being bewitched and more than a few found their way to the scaffold. The whole upper society of the state was destroyed. From that day on it no longer took an active part in the wars and was soon absorbed by a more powerful neighbor. And myself? As the serving girl called Magda, I returned east with Melia and her brother. I had nowhere else to go, being an unattached female, and the society which I left was in chaos. In fact, as soon as we arrived Countess Dagmar took me under her control and I remained in the castle for some weeks. She set me under the control of an old female servant, who rigorously, with slaps, kicks, persuasion and threats had me learn the rudiments of housekeeping, washing, cooking and other female skills. Not only was the work misery for me, but I found my new body awkward and often bruised myself at my hips and scratched my breasts the first days. I was not allowed to forget my clothing either. I was expected to be neat and carefully dressed. Once I was even made to wear a heavy laced undergarment called a corset. The Countess had heard of these being used by women in France and wanted to try them for herself and her female servants. I was glad when she did not persist. Melia married her Johann, abandoned her gypsy ways and settled down happily in the city to domesticity. She even became a very regular church attender, despite her background. Her brother and aunt lived with them briefly but soon resumed their gypsy wandering and departed with another band. Melia told me later that she had given her aunt both copies of the spell book. Thus I was left with no hope of change. After my time at the castle Melia took me as a servant and I was barely out of her sight as she continually refined my domestic skills. Eventually I became reconciled to my beauty and sought to enhance it, in the manner of women. Eventually I began to attract men, and I found her predictions for me, just before she transformed me, to be true. I began to notice men, to watch them, and desire them. It was barely a year after my transformation that I met a man with whom found exhilaration, tears, passion, frustration and love, and took up a new life. I never touched wine or beer again.